Welcome to the DIY Writer Show with the mild-mannered, slightly heroic host, Jeff Bacon.
This is Jeff Bacon with the DIY Writer Podcast. Today we have Christopher Russell with us, the author of Divinity's Twilight, Rebirth. Divinity's Twilight is a series, and the first book came out June 2nd, 2020. Christopher's also an engineer, so we get to talk to him about how he, kind of implements magic and science and all that kind of goofy stuff. But then, without any further ado, Christopher, take off. Tell us about your book, man.
Thanks for having me on, Jeff. Well, my book is an epic fantasy. You can see a little bit over my shoulder, but closer. Here's the book itself, the cover, back blurb. But no, this has been a great experience. Like you said, taking my engineering background, combining that with my love of writing into an epic fantasy story. The tagline I like to give is, what if the heroes of legend didn't save the world, but only delayed the inevitable? So you have an inciting incident way back in history. Divinity's Twilight, the gods have disappeared and mortals are left to fend for themselves. It's what if the adults left the house and the children had the run of the kitchen, pulling everything out, causing problems. And 700 years down the line from this inciting incident, what is happening? An ancient evil has been resurrected that everybody thought had been dealt with, that the heroes of legend had defeated. And now a new generation of people related to those in the past, but having no idea anything about the circumstances that they're being forced to undertake, have to deal with it. And there's a lot of war. There's a lot of background in history, I'd say. One of the central conflicts is that you have three nations founded by three brothers that are still in essentially a never-ending war. Each of them have their ideals for peace, why they should be in charge. And this is just within one race, just a civil war within one race. But then there's 6 other races for a total of 7. So there's a lot of politics, a lot of infighting, a lot of examination of real world themes and wars, but it's just a fun little playground. And then the engineering side comes in. I have to include a little bit of steampunk, and that is my magtech, which involves the magical resource Illyrium, and that enables things like electricity, weapon systems, heating, air conditioning, very anachronistic things, even though some of the armies are still clad in chainmail or wielding rifles. But they also have these great airships and battleships that soar through the sky and are used for, of course, trade and warfare. So a lot of different cool little things that we're able to bring together. It's sort of a bridging of genres between fantasy and science fiction, which is something I really enjoy.
So it's kind of got that steampunk feel to it.
Yes, but where I get around with that, it is steam energy that is enabled by the Illyrium. I could give you a long-winded scientific explanation for why it works, and I try to steer clear of that in the book. I just do a paragraph at a time, otherwise I'm just going to lose the reader. But it's very clean burning is what I'll say. So you don't have all this smoke being exhaled into the atmosphere like you normally have with your steampunk environment. This is more, I would say, the Star Wars element, where you have grav pads along the bottom of the warships that enable them to reach elevation. So that's the more sci-fi element. So you have, imagine you have an Imperial Star Destroyer that wasn't as fast, wasn't as heavily armed, but was floating in the atmosphere at like a mile or 2 in the air.
Oh, so that's actually like the last Star Wars.
Where they shouldn't have been able to navigate an atmosphere. We will raise the fleet at the last possible second. It won't already be in space.
I went to the first Star Wars movie with my grandfather, and I was blown away by it, and I was immediately a Star Wars fan. Back in the 70s. I'm a mite bit older than you are.
Yes, Phantom Menace was my first experience at 6 years old, and I watched that with my grandfather, and we got out of the first showing, and I said, "Let's go in again." And so for me, I forgive the Phantom Menace for a lot of its flaws.
Yeah. Phantom Menace I didn't think was horrible. I thought it was it was geared to kids. You know, I mean, Jar Jar Binks and, you know, all that kind of crap. I mean, it was fine. It was, you know, and it
Well, the
was
funny
the
thing
rebirth
is,
of the movies,
yes.
you know, which
The,
was like, okay, this is cool. And obviously, you know, it's going to be different because it's so much, you know, so much time in between the third movie of my generation and the first movie of yours.
well, I
thought that
couldn't care
was
less about Jar Jar Binks. What attracted me was the Trade Federation, the
the trade
droids.
F6.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That was so cool. What was it? The AT-ATs, the deploying of the droids, the tanks, the massive battle at the end. That was my favorite part. And then as I got older, it was the politics that I enjoyed, that the subterfuge, the intrigue, what was going on beneath the surface. And so, of course, that's why I ended up writing fantasy. But that is the long-winded part that loses a lot of people, because the first movie, episode 4, is much better paced.
I think in you know, if you know, because I went to the movie before I ever read any of the books, and then they came out with, I don't even know how many Star Wars books there are, because they took so many different, you know, paths. I mean,
There's a few hundred.
Like I said, I kind of lost track. At one point in time, I had a collection of them when I was a kid. You know, and they're just a little, you know, whatever you buy from Scholastic, you know, they're probably 120 pages, 50 pages, whatever they were. And that's where they started developing, you know, Han Solo and Chewbacca are going off and doing, you know, this, and, you know, followed Luke in this series or whatever. And there's 5 or 6 books in that one, you know, and it was easy reads. And then I kind of lost track of all that stuff. And then when the movies came back, I that second round with Phantom Menace, I was like, oh, I need to find those books, let my kids read them, right? Yeah, in a move they got tossed.
Oh,
I'm like, you know, I just had it boxed up. For years, the only thing I read were tech journals from probably 94 till about 2008. I would guess it was all Microsoft and, you know, SQL and, you know, all the computer shit or stuff. And but when I tried to go find those, I'm guessing they probably were some money, because they're all in the 80s and 90s.
What was it? I don't know the exact date, but the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. I know that was the 90s as well, or maybe late 80s.
Yeah, you know, I don't know. I'd have to actually look that up.
Because I think that's the first novelization, like full-length novel, that came after the first 3 movies.
Oh, these weren't full-length novels. These were maybe novelettes with really big print. Maybe.
I have a few of those, the later ones, the late 90s and 2000s. I think they were like the Jedi Academy, and then there was Jedi Apprentice, and one follows Anakin, one follows Obi-Wan.
Yeah, I never got those. Most of mine were about after the Death Star blew up, and then they'd have these little, like, probably novelettes, I would guess, is about the length of them, you know, on a little, you know, pocket, like a, you know, maybe they're 5x8s. I don't know, whatever it was. But like I said, they sold.
I still have a few of those, actually, probably in the boxes around here.
Oh, you didn't throw yours away, huh? Nice.
No, well, I probably have most of my library was actually Star Wars books. Was
it really?
I started, so the first book that my parents handed me that was novel length was probably Redwall by Brian Jacques. Have you ever heard the Redwall series?
Yes.
So anthropomorphic animals, they live in their own world. They build abbeys and fortresses and have grand feasts, and the vermin are the enemies, and then your clean animals, your mice, your shrews, your otters, etc., are the heroes. And I was fascinated by those. That's probably what got me into loving fantasy. But that was elementary school, moved into Tolkien, and then high school was Star Wars. That I forget what was the first Star Wars book I picked up, but I read basically all of the old extended universe that is now non-canon. So I could go on for days about how upset I am that Disney declared all that non-canon and that they created their own sequel movies instead of paying Zahn a small royalty to use the Thrawn trilogy, which would have been brilliant.
The Disney has a wonderful way of taking things and trying to make them sensational and failing at it. I think.
I don't know what it was, because Marvel seemed to work. That I was never a big comic guy, so I don't know what they've messed up. Someone else could weigh in on that. But with Star Wars, it seems to be more of a case of, and you even see this with the Disney must pay hashtag, that it seems to be trying to start anew so that they don't have to connect to what was before.
See, now Marvel, I think that I don't think they screwed too much up, and I think that's directly because Stan Lee was involved with most of it. You know, he was there, and he was the one that was kind of guiding them, what would make a good movie versus what's in the comics and so on and so forth. It'll be interesting to see how they bastardize it now that he's gone and all the rights have gone to Disney now.
And that's the question, though, because you've reached the point in the Marvel universe where you have massively escalating power levels. You have reached basically the deity state of your story with Thanos. And what do you do beyond that to raise tension? I know that it was done in the comics. I haven't read much about it, but it'd be interesting, like you said, to see how Disney handles that. Well,
they could go all sorts of different directions because they have the multiverse. I mean, so they've got all these different worlds and they've got all these different, villains that can come in that are just as powerful, if not more, some that are more powerful than Thanos ever was, so they could go all different directions with it, but I think
I know that they were teasing Adam, but I forget how Adam plays in. ADAM, not ADAM.
Yeah, I don't know how they're going to play that in. I really don't. You can guess, but I mean, was it Abrams, I think, is one of their directors, and God knows what he could make Adam. I don't know. He could do anything he wanted to. And, it'll sell because it'll be sensational, and it'll be a whole bunch of people that will be like, this is just wrong. It's not right. Can't believe you did that. But, they'll go to the movies anyway, just so they can criticize it.
I'm still crossing my fingers that The Mandalorian continues to be good.
Have you started watching that, or?
I've only seen season 1. I'm waiting for season 2 to be finished so I can binge it.
Yeah, me too. And it's been hard. It's been hard because there's so much there. In some of the groups I'm in, they have they start posting, oh my God, this is such a great episode, and it's like, okay, skip. I don't want to see it, But,
not to call out DW, but there was a post about villains in Indie Fantasy Addicts yesterday, and it said, who would be the villain that you want to hang out with? I said Grand Admiral Thrawn from Star Wars. And he says, oh, well, he was name dropped in the last episode of The Mandalorian. Thanks, DW.
I kind of saw that and kind of just, whoops, almost blocked him. No, just kidding. Yeah.
Love DW.
Oh yeah, he's a great guy. He's a great guy. He's a fantastic writer. At one point in time, he had a box set out there that was like 99 cents. And this is before I knew him. And I just looked at it. Yeah, I'll pick that up. And it got thrown in my to be read books.
Which must be as long as the world is around, right?
Oh, it's horrible. It's horrible. I've got a I think I've got like 50 some books left on that to read. And some of them are like books where, people have asked me to write a review for them or something like that. And it's just like, I can't get it done. I try and pick up everybody's books when I think of it. And then it's like, okay, I'll read it and I'll write, a decent review.
Might be a few years, but that's fine.
It might be. I can't read as fast as you guys do. I not anymore.
Well, I think I got all of 2 books done for the summer challenge.
Did you really?
Yes. Well, there's this disconnect. I don't know if you noticed this yourself. When you become a writer You become there's a certain amount of it that's work, the plotting, the planning, the sitting down and developing your prose and your scenes. And that is, at the very least, it's a pseudo job, no matter how much you enjoy writing. And so when you finish that for the day, well, what do you want to do for your, to de-stress, your mental health period, so to speak? And do you want to hop back into somebody else's world that's very similar to yours? Or do you want to do something that is detoxing in a way, mindless, whether it's an exercise or a video game or watching TV? Well, I still read, I still do a balance, but I often choose the former just because it's different. It is not the same thing. And I've heard it said it's how the sausage is made. That, yes, no double entendre involved there, but how the sausage is made, that for a long period after you start writing, whether it's months or years, you can't read without delving beneath the surface and seeing the structure, seeing the girders and the foundation, rather than just the finished product, that you start to pick it apart automatically. And then supposedly eventually your brain goes back to normal and you just see the story. But I'm still in the how the sausage is made stage, where I'm evaluating, well, this is what this person did very well. I can see how they developed this character arc, and I can see these plot points connecting. And it's great for writing craft, but I'd say that it's not as great for enjoyment.
Right. I can kind of disconnect myself when I sit down and read. But I usually, especially if it's a Bud's book, you know, somebody I know or whatever, and it's like, oh God, how, you know, most of the people I read, I look at and go, holy crap, how'd they do that? Because I'm not, you know, I'm kind of that urban dark fantasy, so I don't build the worlds, and I have very weak magic systems and everything else. Most of it's kind of towards thriller, kind of, you know, I mean, it's different than what you guys write. You know, you guys write incredible detail and everything else, and someday I'll try that, but I'm just not there yet. I've got some other projects I want to work on, but
well, it's funny you should mention that. Years ago, well, I say years ago for me, so this is over a decade for me, which is like, I'm 28, so that's almost half my life.
Almost half your life, yeah.
Almost half my life. Half my life ago, I started writing historical fiction. And it was this book called First Legion, which was a what-if scenario if Julius Caesar hadn't been assassinated. And I took some artistic liberties, and I gave the Bruttii family, for Brutus, I gave them more power than they would have actually had, so they could succeed, and there was this Roman civil war. And I told it from the perspective of a centurion being sent to quell this civil war from Caesar's faction. And I got about 100, 150 pages into that, and I got bored with it. And the reason I got bored with it was I could create this fictional centurion. I could create his friends and his command structure and his family. But beyond that, I had to use Caesar. I had to use Brutus. I had to use all these other people that existed. I had to use weapons and armor like the gladius. I had to use their culture and their gods and everything. There wasn't enough creativity. And that's what brought me to fantasy and science fiction, that I wanted to take my love of real world history and engineering and culture and society and blend it into something epic and great, which is how I ended up in epic fantasy, where you create this giant tapestry of a world.
Cool. I started just because I wanted to mess with the church.
Well, that's the funny thing. I'd say that pretty much every fantasy author eventually ends up using religion in some way or another, that it's essentially unavoidable because it's a part of people's lives, regardless of what anyone's faith background is. That my religious system in Divinity's Twilight is like a combination between Christianity and Hinduism. That you had a original progenitor god that, in order to be more efficient, split himself into 7 parts, one for each facet of his personality and one for each of the 7 races. So all of the 7 races have a core tenet that defines them, that was part of their divinity. But of course, like I said, all these gods have disappeared. And so there is the weakening of that core personality trait, that magic in its violent sense persists, but in its more noble connective sense has begun dissipating because you've lost that connection to the divine.
That's really kind of interesting. I like the way you did that. I and I apologize. I haven't read your book yet.
Oh, no. I understand. Like I said, it's going to
Yeah.
probably be 2 to 3 years if you even get to it.
I will get to it. I will
Yeah.
get to it.
By then, half the series could be out. You won't have to wait.
Then I can binge read.
Yes.
My main thing is time.
Mhm.
You know, I've got my computer consulting that I do, and that is, you know, kind of on demand. You know,
Mhm.
it's usually not too much you can plan. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's not like they have planned outages or, you
Mhm.
know, it's kind of break fix. You know, usually I get the call, my network's down, my phone system's down. I need you here now, you know,
Mhm.
type stuff. And so it's, you know, get everything to a stopping point and quit. I've been lucky enough to be able to do the podcast without being interrupted by that so far.
Mhm.
So it's been kind of nice, but I'm waiting for the day where, you know, 15 minutes before a podcast, I have to cancel it because I have to go out on a service call or something like that. But
Oh.
then my my writing happens kind of throughout the day if I have some spare time,
Mhm.
and then most of it happens at night.
Mhm.
And what I do, and that what I consider writing is, you know, reading, writing, you know, playing around with different things, coming up with outlines for ideas, and you know,
Mhm.
whatever that process is, and also marketing and all that other crap. So, you know, of course, to make things easier, I threw a podcast in it just to make sure I have no time at all to do anything else. But you know, that's okay.
Well, in my experience, you, Allegra, various other people I know in my sphere of writing, the most effective writers are the ones that leave themselves very little actual time to write
Yeah.
because they cherish it. They force themselves to do it. They don't let anything distract them because it's precious. Now, me with the pandemic, the silver lining has been that I have a lot more time to write because I finished up with my PhD last year, and the University of Virginia said to me, well, we are going into pandemic restrictions. Would you like to teach a virtual class? So I am now, I guess, an associate professor that I teach a statics course virtually, YouTube lectures,
Mm-hmm.
Zoom, etc. And it gives me a lot more free time. And then I also tutor on the side.
Okay.
So that's a little more like, it's not emergency like in your case, but that's more fluid. But I know when my class is going to be, and I know that I have a bunch of time to write and to market. And I typically end up doing one or the other, that my brain doesn't shift well between marketing and writing. It's all consuming either way.
So how does an engineer and a writer, and you know, you're an indie you're an indie author, so I mean you have that marketing and all that creativity. How does that survive in one big brain?
I don't think it really wars with each other, that they sort of influence each other.
That's cool.
I would say that it might have been the background that I had at UVA, because UVA, we like to brag and say that we produce front room engineers. And I don't know how much you know about Virginia and the rivalry between the schools here. Anything?
A little bit.
So first day I go to UVA, they take us into an orientation, and a psychologist stands up on the stage and he says, I'm going to show you a few flash images really quick in like 15 seconds. And they're about UVA and University of Virginia and Virginia Tech, who's our
Okay.
rival. And so they go back and forth. And so there's positive things next to the UVA image, negative next to the Virginia Tech. And he says at the end of it, all right, I've given you a clicker. I want you to say whether you think these are positive or negative. He flashes through again. Well, overwhelmingly positive UVA, overwhelmingly negative Virginia Tech. That
Sure.
within the first 15 minutes you've been at UVA, you already hate Virginia Tech.
You're
You're
already
in-state
being
rival.
programmed.
Yes. And so, but the difference is that they say that UVA produces front room engineers that are charismatic, good at dealing with people, and that Tech produces the number crunchers that hide in a dark hole in the back room and never see the sunlight. So that's the comparison they make. But what UVA does in actuality is they have this program called Science, Technology, and Society, that as you go up through your engineering courses, learning the technical side, you're also learning the effect that your products are going to have on the real world, that there are consequences to your actions, that you're doing English papers, that you're learning about technology and thinkers throughout history, what they did, you're writing papers, you're discussing elements of technology. as they have an effect on society. With the invention of the internet, how that had a cultural revolution, or go further back, how the invention of the printing press was a cultural revolution, what it did to change society. And that is a very fantasy thing, that we change something, that we have a development introduced, and that causes ripples. Of course, that's on the world building side. That's not on the character side, but they influence each other.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
there's feeding into each other. I'd say that at the boundary between every single discipline, that there is a gray area where they merge into each other, that you can probably have a giant circle of disciplines. Kind of like a circle of magic.
A circle of magic.
Yeah.
So your magic systems that you build, are they I mean, obviously it's magic, but I assume that they've got some sort of a, you know, we talked a little bit about it. I can't remember if it was before the podcast or whatever, but they've got a little bit of a science backing to them. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, it's not a, you know, just woo, here's a blue light and I can do this.
Well, I'd say it's on a science scale. That Divinity's Twilight has two magic systems, I would say. There is the extremely hard magic system, MagTech, that you have an Allerium crystal. It decays essentially by a radioactive process, even though it is not radioactive. That energy is collected, and you're able to produce thermal, electrical, various other types of energy off of that you're able to collect it. And eventually the crystal will go done. It will be useless. There are things in the mythology. There is a perfect version of Allerium, Alleriite, that is permanent, and that plays into the ancient three brothers and their war, because they each found a piece of Alleriite and decided to use its incredible power to pursue their vision of peace, and eventually came into conflict with each other. But then on the softer side, there is the blood-based magic, that you have Manair, similar to midichlorians, I would say, flowing through the bloodstream, and it enables you to manifest different magical powers with a catalyst normally. And that catalyst is some sort of engraved object, whether it be a sword, an earring, a necklace, a staff, something infused with Allerium, because Allerium, as a magical resource with Manair in it, makes a great catalyst for the natural blood magic. Okay. And so you're able to manifest a variety of abilities from that, whether they be elemental, whether they be summoning and conjuration, whether they be necromantic, degenerative, dark, light, that I actually have 10 schools of magic on that side. So very expansive. And what I plan to do for the next book, because I'm developing the basics in the first book, not going too deep into that part of the world building. But in the second book, I plan to have a table of magical elements, and that it essentially is going to be, I think, a dodecahedron of some sort that shows the interrelation between all the different types of magic, and that you have a affinity for one, and that you will also have a lesser affinity for the connecting nodes. That there is a very scientific, like you said, process to be able to move from one ability to the other. And then, of course, in keeping with the engineering, I'm writing an Asian fantasy standalone right now that is going to be in the same wider Divinity's Twilight universe that I'm calling the Constella. Gravitas, my entry for From the Shadows, the short story anthology, is a standalone story in this wider universe that introduced the name of the wider universe. I've been talking a long time. My voice is starting to go, getting that scratchy.
Just grab a drink, dude.
Oh, I will. But so the Asian Fantasy Standalone uses a magic system based on thermodynamics and heat transfer. You have, conduction, convection, radiation, your laws of thermodynamics, and all of those have been converted into their magical equivalents, so to speak. Then all of the powers are based on those. That you can radiate a wave of heat, you can conduct heat directly into something, and then you can convect the air around you to fly, but you can only go up because heat only rises. You have to find some other way to come down.
Very, very cool. Very cool. So how long did it take you to map out your magic system?
I tend to be more of a pantser. So I've become more of a plotter as I've gone deeper into the series. For example, the entire
I have a really hard time imagining you as a pantser. You're a pantser.
Well, some people have said that, and then they go, "Well, listen to what he's saying on our podcast or the interview." That I basically, this is what I have in my head, and then I have more notes in addition to that. They keep track of things for me.
Sure. Okay.
So, the first arc of Divinity's Twilight was created while I was mowing the lawn. That for an entire summer I was mowing a lawn. It was about 3/4 of an acre, and I double cut the front yard.
Mhm.
And so this was an hour and a half, and I spent an hour and a half every week thinking about this first arc. And then I basically wrote it from memory, that I had plotted it all out in my head. Well, after that point, it became too expansive, and I had to start writing notes down. But I typically test ideas out on the page first, and then I'll have ideas away from the page that I'll write down in a notebook or in my phone that I'll then collect and put into a later chapter. So there is organization. It's just not the skeleton and muscle organization of a plotter, so to say. Mm-hmm. And so the magic systems, they typically come to me like the Asian fantasy. The first idea was, it's all started from a line. The very first line, the first chapter was because it's told from a young female protagonist's point of view, that first chapter. And she says, "Father, why haven't they blown the horns yet?" And this is a very harsh world, very cold climate. And if your tension in your atmosphere, in your world is caused by a temperature differential, well, what's the opposite of cold? Well, it's heat. Well, technically cold is the absence of heat if we want to get into an engineering discussion on that. But assume that cold and heat are opposites for a second. So that is how you alleviate tension, is that somebody has the ability to wield heat magic, that they have some way to drive back the harshness of this climate. So that's where the conflict is, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And so I take a central idea and I expand outward from there. Horns blowing, hunting party has gone out. Maybe this is like the cold reaches of a very early human society. In this case, it's Asian fantasy, so it's a little bit of Chinese and Japanese and a feudal society. But if you were to imagine for a second that they've been set back and there's a little bit of a hunter-gatherer mentality, well, they're going out to hunt something to bring back meat. Cold society, like hunting mammoths, throwing spears, and then you work your way back.
You know, what really interests me about what you're saying about, with your book is actually, the whole thing is very interesting. I might bump it up on my list, but you've got these 7 nations.
Mm-hmm.
And each one, I love the plot as far as, you have 3 brothers and they're each trying to seek their own version of peace.
Mm-hmm.
So in that search of peace, they go ahead and go to war, which is
inevitably, of course, right?
Of course, peace always leads to war. It actually does, but and then you have the 7 nations of probably varying technologies and varying skills and powers and everything else. I mean, you can go years on this path.
Mm-hmm.
That is,
well, what I'm doing is, I would call there's almost arcs to this, and this is where the pantser comes in. I wrote a somewhat comprehensive outline after I finished the first book.
Okay.
And it was supposed to be to the end of it was supposed to be to the end of the first book, though. So I say finish the first book. At the time, I didn't know it was the ending of the first book because I just kept writing.
Right.
And I had originally intended for a whole bunch of events to take place in the first book. And that was going to originally be a trilogy. However, Divinity's Twilight Rebirth is only a third of that original first book. So it has expanded since the beginning. That in order, as I started to fill in events and realized what I needed to do to logically move from point A to point B, I had to expand things. And so that first event that I thought of when I was starting to write the story, because I started with the villain for Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, which is very fitting for us having just released From the Shadows, a villain anthology. Started with the villain, very important, basically the crux of what everything's revolving around. And there's a big event with them that was supposed to be at the end of book 1, but is now at the end of book 3.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything else spiraled off from that, replotting. Now I'm projecting Divinity's Twilight to be a 10-book series in 6 books up at the front, and then a definitive conclusion to that arc, and then a 4-book conclusion handling the remaining plot threads.
Very cool.
Yes. So that is where the Pantser gets into trouble, where I went back and I had completed basically book 2 at that point. And when I went back to publish, I went back with a scalpel and said, this is a good place to cut. Let's clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
And that became Divinity's Twilight Rebirth. Mm-hmm.
Oh, pantsing.
Yes.
I did something stupid last night.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of relates to your Pantser thing. I've got a story that I'm working on, and it's kind of a post-apocalyptic world where, you know, most power sources are gone. It goes back to steam, basically. So it's not really steampunk, but whatever. But this lady is builds mechanical pets, and she has 12 dogs, and she's getting into some trouble anyway. She needs to find a better way to store energy, because they use steam to actually charge these batteries that they've built. Mm-hmm. And so she takes a battery design from her mentor, and she's trying to make these batteries. And it was going to be the thing that solves a problem in the book. And somehow, some way, the Pantser and me blew up her lab, and all the batteries are gone now, and all the materials that she had found are gone, and she has no idea what was actually in this mix. And so now she's got to figure it out. I got done writing that last night. It's like, what the hell did I just do? I mean, it's a better story, but shit.
What right. Is it? I forget. I'm probably going to get this wrong, but the Pantser mentality. If you wanted to put a name to it, or to make it to categorize it, I think it's the if-then something or other method, that if you want to reach this, then this happens. Do I make it? Does this resolve the problem? If not, what happens? Does this resolve the problem? Is there an escalation? What happens next? Something like that.
If then else.
It's never wrong to make things worse, but you eventually have to tie it off and start the next arc.
Mm-hmm. That's the problem. Where do we go from here? So that's where I'm stuck tonight working.
Yeah. So you blew up her lab. So I guess the next thing would be is she still wants to create this batteries. So what does she have to do to get her next set of batteries?
She's not going to have time, because she's going to get arrested.
So the new problem is that she has to get out of jail,
right,
and then start making her batteries.
Right.
Unless she starts making her batteries in jail, that she makes a much simpler version and then blows up the wall. She recreates the experiment in the lab to get out of jail.
She might, but she's got to make dogs for somebody else now. Is where the story leads. Mm-hmm. Which also gets her in a lot of trouble in the next. I'm doing one of those stupid things where I had this idea just to do like a novelette every 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. I've got 9 of these things I just want to throw out there real quick. Mm-hmm. And I've got the outlines done exactly how I want the story to go, and then I just keep on screwing it up. But you know, I kind of want to just throw something out there like in March or something like that, and just start bing, 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 and have 18 weeks of releases. Mm-hmm. Along with the other 3 books I want to throw out there, and try and do a rapid release real quick, and it'll be interesting. But every 3 books will create a paperback. Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that yet, but
no, it sounds like a great idea. Rapid releases seem to always work.
They seem to, and somebody else had done. Actually, a couple people have done, you know, just these little novelettes where they threw out, and it's kind of a series, you know, and every 2 weeks, and then you get your binge readers that just, you know, pick it up and your Kindle reads go up and blah, 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 blah. But it's just, I don't know. I know a guy who does this every year. He throws out 9 little books, 9 little novelettes, and it's just, you know, something other than what he's currently writing.
I think it's a lot about human psychology, that even though those 120 pages books equal one hefty epic fantasy, that people are more, they think the hefty epic fantasy is going to be a bigger time sink when they're exactly the same. It's about the I think it's the accomplishment, the sense of I'm making progress, I'm getting through something. You get through that first 120 pages and you finish a book, I'm done, it was great, I can digest it, go do something else, then pick up the next one. But 120 pages into that big epic fantasy, you're still in the story. You're still in the same book.
The guy I talked to, he said basically I have 8 cliffhangers, and then you wrap it up on the 9th. And then he said the sweet spot is anywhere between 12,000 and 20,000 words. He said, and any more than that, he said, you start to lose readers. But if you have it, it's like a 2-hour quick read, boom, and it's like a mini series on TV type thing or whatever. And there's a lot of parameters they kind of laid out on how he gets it to work. But he does this every year, and it's like, okay, cool.
Well, even with that, the mentality is different, because in a big book, you typically don't want to end on a cliffhanger. You want to end on a little bit of intrigue, but you don't want to end on something that is going to leave the reader in a state of anxiety, a state of that they need something more.
Yeah, and so that's you know, I don't know. This will be interesting if it works. I may sell 3 of these. Who knows? But
no, I think it's going to work out great, and that's something that I love to see about the industry, is all the different paths to success, the way that people are making things work.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Even the authors I've talked to so far, everybody's got a little bit different methodology. I talked to Jeff Kahanick, was it on Monday? You know, he's got the Fallbrandt Publishing, and he's got some authors underneath of him and everything else. And, you know, he's got just a little bit different methodology for what he does for advertising, you know, how he puts things together, how he, you know, whatever. And it's very interesting to me in talking to authors, how many things is like, oh shit, that's, you know, everybody's got that little piece of brilliance in them that's like, oh, I could use that at some point in time, you know. And, you know, and there's some things that's like that never worked for me, but it's these completely separate markets. I mean, if you want to think of it that way, I mean, nobody's really in competition with each other, but these totally separate markets that, and divisions of readers that kind of have an expectation of what you're going to do as an author. And, you know, you end up having your own person or your own persona and your own way of doing things. And some of it works and some of it doesn't, you know, and then you just kind of pick and choose and cut out until you get to somebody who's, you know, like Andy Pelican. He's pretty dang successful. You know, he does.
Well, he also writes like a madman. He just cranks things out. I think I was looking at his Kerberos trilogy, well, not trilogy, series the other day, because what is it, 11, 12 books, something like that. I was looking at it on Amazon, and I went into expecting it to be novelettes, like you said, that it was going to be 100 to 200 pages max. Each one of those is 300 to 400 pages on either the ebook version, and he cranks one out every month, every 2 months.
Well, I haven't talked to him about what he actually does for like a word count every day or anything like that. But I talked to Katrina Hudson. She writes 19,000 words a day.
Wow.
6-7 days a week, you know, and that's just what she does.
Which for me, the epic fantasy model works. I am very deliberate, very slow. I think about every sentence that I put to paper. That's just me. That's the way I've always been, that I'm very careful. And so I will average.
Hence the engineering.
Yes, it's the engineering. I will average 700 to 800 words an hour, that I will probably get somewhere between 2 and 3K done in a writing day. So that's 4 to 5 hours of writing. And then my brain's burnt. I need to recharge. And that puts out an epic fantasy once to twice a year, that 400 to 500 page book.
Yep.
And so what I do in response, though, is that I do a whole lot more marketing, that I spend a lot more time on social media, on newsletters, on trying to get into bookstores, even in the middle of coronavirus, to do signings. I have a signing this Saturday at a book warehouse in Williamsburg, Virginia. Shameless plug.
Shameless plugs are more than welcome here.
But no, it's I try to be a lot more personable, do a lot more connections, but of course that takes more time away from writing. So there's some balance to be struck, and there's a lot of people, like you said, Andy, Jeff, that they have that mastered. They've been in the sphere for years. So eventually we'll all find our place.
I hope so.
Yes.
That's the hope. Otherwise we'll just drive ourselves nuts. I think the biggest thing that I take away from everybody, you know, in much larger authors than I'll probably ever be, is that it's just a matter of just sticking to it. You know, it takes 5-6 years. It does that. You know, you have to do.
It seems to be the backlist. Everyone's backlist is what eventually propels them forward.
Yeah, yeah. You know, Craig Martell says 20 books. Takes 20 books to make it. You know, some make it sooner, some it takes 30 books, but 20 books is the average. You know, and that's his whole mantra, and that's, you know, what he's based a pretty good following and course on. Is you know, and that's, I don't know if do you belong to 20 books to 50K?
No, I don't.
Oh,
but I definitely I see that mentality. And you even see that with traditional. George R. R. Martin took forever to break in, and it took Game of Thrones just becoming a smash hit. And that's what propelled him. And then you have the opposite on traditional. You have Patrick Rothfuss sitting on 2 books and being at the edge of the industry.
Yeah. So. You know, I think it's just a matter of what the, actually, it's just a matter of luck. You know, because I mean, somebody can be sitting on 2 really awesome books and they have to write 13 other crappy books before it actually takes off. R.L. Stine, do you ever hear his story?
I have not.
Oh, he, you know, he wrote the Goosebumps. He wrote a bunch of them, and they just sat around, and nobody really bought them. Nobody really knew anything about it. You know, just these books he wrote. And then one day, he said, you know, I don't know what happened, but somebody picked it up in the library and liked it and passed it around or something. I don't know. Just one day, all of a sudden, you know, I think it was like 5-6 years after he wrote the last one, or, I mean, it's some weird time frame. It just took off. All of a sudden, everybody's like, oh my God. And he got the TV series and he got, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, I mean, it was just magical. And so he wrote a bunch of those, and then it kind of died off, and he hasn't been able to figure out how to reproduce that. You know, he's got a bunch of other writings out there.
As people say, lightning in a bottle.
Yeah. I mean, just, you know, and Goosebumps are still his best-selling, you know, books, but he has other books out there that, you know, it's just, he thinks are better than the Goosebumps, but just don't get the same type of accolades or sales.
Because it's what appeals. And I would never advise anyone to write to market. Write what's you, because I feel like that's always going to be stronger. Of course, there's people that can write to market and do it. Even it either meshes with their vision, their direction, or it doesn't. They're just that talented. But I think you're going to have a lot more enjoyment writing what you want to do and then trying to bring people to your vision.
I know at least 3 authors that study the K-lytics reports, and that's what sets their production for their books. You know, okay, I need to write to this market, and that's exactly what they. Very successful full-time authors, and they sell a ton of books. But that's what they do. So I mean, if you know, Vampire Academies are what's up right now, that's what they write. They write 6 books in Vampire Academies. It's like, okay. And then they may switch to zombies, and they may switch to, you know, witch academies, or they may switch to, you know, whatever.
Well, they're hanging out in that YA sphere where it's just slowly morphing from one thing to the next.
Yeah. Steampunk, you know, lit RPG. I mean, you know, they're all over the place. But
I don't know where we are now. I think we're exiting dystopian, maybe.
Maybe. I don't know, you know. I don't think I can ever exit dystopian just because I'm a huge Margaret Atwood fan. don't know if you've read her Handmaid Tale.
I have not. No.
Oh,
I need to.
eh,
Shame.
shame. No, there's like what 4 billion books out there to read, but it is. I don't know. I have the book and I've read it twice. And and then I watched the series. I actually read it, watched the series, and then read it again. Just because, like I said, I'm a huge fan of hers. But the thing I like about her, she took all sorts of historical things and threw them into one book. Everything that's in her books have actually happened, and then she just created a world out of it.
Which is the interesting thing, that it's about, again, genre lines. That when we typically think of dystopian, we think of the future of our world. This is something that's either happening in a close future or a far future. But I think that you can do dystopian anywhere, in any type of setting, and have it shelved in the different places. It's how does the line get drawn? Fantasy typically is that it's magical or it's other world, and so it gets shelved there, even if you have a dystopian theme. I would say that in the Asian fantasy that I'm writing, that the government is very dystopian, but it's better shelved in fantasy because it's alternate world, high fantasy magic system. So
I think you're right to an extent. I think the greatest dystopian book ever written would be 2020. Whoever wrote this year just sucks, but I think things get miscategorized at times, but you can have a dystopian society in any type of book, I guess, as far as that goes. But I don't like the fact that like urban fantasy, all it really has to do is be in an urban setting, and then you have all these people that argue about is it really urban fantasy versus a dark fantasy versus what's the new one, some other fantasy, which is basically
Grimdark.
What's that?
You talking about Grimdark?
No, not Grimdark. Grimdark's it's a little bit newer than that.
Paranormal.
What's that?
Paranormal fantasy.
It's not paranormal either. It's
okay.
It does start with a P. I can't remember it. So I don't know. It doesn't matter. But and then everybody gets in these arguments where everything sits. It's like, well, this isn't really urban fantasy because whatever. It could be YA urban fantasy and be put into a dark
in many ways. With our labels and our keywords and everything, we become too specific. It's becoming increasingly difficult for anybody to find different works, because you've had these communities that have started to become insular and isolate themselves, that they only want these specific 3 things in their works.
Well, the problem is that there's so much material out there. So how do you if you threw everything into just a fiction, this is fiction.
Yes.
You've got 60 million books out there that fall into that. How do you ever get found? And so that's why they have to, isolate themselves so that they can at least find a readership. Otherwise,
but it's like you said, like, I haven't read Margaret Atwood's work. Well, I've been diving deep into epic fantasy. Brandon Sanderson, Patrick Rothfuss, George R.R. Martin, all these huge hefty tomes that are in what I write. And so just don't expand, that you're so close to the sea floor that you can't see the shallows over next to you in another genre.
That is true. That is true. So so is that your favorite genre to read, is epic fantasy?
Probably. So what actually convinced me that I wanted to start writing fantasy professionally was Shadows of the App by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And that's what I read in college and undergrad. And the reason that it spoke to me so much was he writes a very low fantasy, high fantasy world. That obviously I have gone very high fantasy in my magic because that's a separate part of me. But what he did is that there was basically 2 types of people in the world. There was the apt and the inapt. The inapt ruled once upon a time because they had the powers of ancient magic. that they were able to do great sorceries, control the weather, the force, the ground, the earth. Well, the apt were great thinkers. They were enslaved by the inapt at one point, but they eventually developed mechanisms, the crossbow, basic medieval weaponry, things like that, that the inapt couldn't use. An inapt, if they were to pick up a crossbow, they would have, even though it's pull back the string, tighten the lass, put the bolt in, fire, they just wouldn't be able to comprehend it. They would not be able to use it. And so the inapt lost to the greater number of the apts, and the positions were basically reversed before the start of the series. And he goes through and he writes a world of fading magic with great emphasis on technological developments and how they influence society and warfare, that there are sudden reversals because of the introduction of something like gunpowder, or the introduction of something that's akin to air power, the projection of power. And so it's taking military strategy and tactics and overlaying it on a fantasy world. And then you have the other background where all of his different races have insect ancestors that have passed down basic powers to them. For example, the wasps, that they can fire a sting from their hand, or they can fly short distances on wings that they can sprout. The ants are able to communicate telepathically. The beetles are very sturdy and hardy. So all of them have something that they've inherited. But I found that I feel like it's a series that doesn't get a lot of visibility, even though he writes for Tor. And so that was what led me that I wanted to do something similar, a military thriller epic fantasy, but with more magic, and then taking the idea of technology and air power to the next step with airships. That is going to be the basic methodology for conducting warfare.
I like it. I like it. One thing that we need to get to. I know you don't have your copy, but you know.
I know mine comes tomorrow.
That's okay. So
that is our bludgeoning weapon.
That is our bludgeoning weapon. It is a hefty 714 pages, I think, or something like that. I don't know.
I'm very excited to get that copy. It's going to be great. But it was a fantastic experience. Lots of talented authors, lots of great stories. I've read a number of them. Everybody was really able to get into the heads of their villains and show a different perspective that I know that I love to write from the villain's perspective, but it seems like a lot of other modern authors do too.
It is, you know, the concept that they came up with to write this, you know, was a villain anthology released during Christmas. And that just tickles me to death. You know, I
think we were originally we were talking about the themes of Winter Wonderland, or writing about a holiday in your world, something very fluffy and nice that's going to bring people joy during the holiday season.
Right. And so then we ended up doing a villain anthology.
It certainly brings us joy. We don't know if it's going to bring joy to the readers.
So far, for those of you who are listening and don't know, it's the Indie Fantasy Addicts group in Facebook that we actually wrote this for. But so far, the members that have read it seem to really enjoy it. I haven't seen anything except for one person saying it might be too long.
Yeah. Well, that's just what happens. I know that I used my full 10K word allotment, but that is my epic fantasy writing. I don't think that I can write a short story. I know that a lot of other people in my same genre have the same problem, that they write 10 to 20,000 word short stories. I know, speaking of Brandon Sanderson in traditional publishing, he was supposed to write a 35,000 word novella to be released before his last Stormlight entry, and he wrote 55,000 words. And so if that happens in traditional, imagine indie, where we have a lot more freedom.
Yeah, no kidding. That's fine as far as in an anthology. You know, so you use 10,000 words. You know, I think I use 5,900 or whatever, but you know, I write urban fantasy. We write small books. our readership has, like attention deficit, they just, like the story to be done, then move on. But, if everybody, if everybody wrote 10,000 words, that would be twice the book that it is, I think.
I would be about 220,000 words. I think she said final word count was 187. So nearly everyone used their allotment.
Everybody but me, evidently. Okay. Yep.
You brought down the average.
I brought down the average. I do that a lot. I do that a lot.
Tell me a bit about your story, Jeff.
What's that? Oh, it is actually an origin story for my series, is what it is. Okay. And so it's a necromancer gone wrong.
Mm-hmm. There were a lot of necromancers in there. You did one.
There's 4.
I think that there was I'm gonna get it wrong, Jack Jackson or
Joe Jackson.
Joe Jackson.
Yeah.
He did the Trouble with Necromancy, which seems to be a fan favorite. There was Ghoul Grief. The opening to the anthology is also necromancer.
Yep. Yeah, necromancers are really cool. We like that dead magic.
Yes. I did a little bit of a political / moral thriller, I would say. It revolves around a guy called Lord Fixer Scraw, that there is a revolution going on in the world / country of Lestat, and he's been called upon by the government of Magisters to stop it. And Gravitas is both the name of the story and the name of the magic system. So it's pretty interesting that the magic system revolves around the value, the history, the importance of objects. The more history something has, the more power that you can draw from it. So a lot of artifacts and art and different things like that. And my tagline for it is, sometimes the cure is worse than the disease. So we'll see whether Lord Fixer Scraw fixes things or makes things worse.
Mine, actually, if anybody were to ask about where it came from, it's actually based on the Witch of Endor from the Bible. So and there's various guesses on what her actual name was, but I call her Sedekula. And her being the first necromancer, somebody that would use the magic for the dead. And basically there's this long line of witches that have come after her and she's her ancestor. And that ties into a character that I have in my main series. His name is Clyde, who's actually the son of the necromancer that is in the short story. And the problem is that in order to ascend, they have to go through this ritual. And if they cut it beforehand, they just become just a menace to society. The power is too much. It's just, they have to, go through the entire process. And so I
guess that's the trouble with necromancy.
Well, it's a little bit different type of magic, but the problem is that Clyde's entire family basically have failed year after year after over the centuries to actually ascend. They just keep on screwing up and they're not able to finish the thing. And his father was no different, and he ends up being paying the price. In the book, in book 4 of my series, Clyde actually is the only or one of the very few that have successfully done this, and he actually ascends, to where he's a very powerful witch who has all sorts of different powers. I'm trying not to give anything away, but
I mean, saying that happens in book 4.
Yeah. And then he actually goes into another series. That's a spin-off of it. So I've got this really weird thing where I have this story on book 4. Everything goes to hell, literally. And then it kind of splits off to where you find my main character, Jacob, over here, and then you find another main character, Hunter Keys. And Clyde kind of follows Hunter because they're still on Earth. Jacob's in another realm. But I've got angels and demons and Greek gods and the regular God and all the archangels, and I've got Satan and Lucifer, and it's kind of biblical, but kind of not. So
kind of like supernatural.
Kind of. Yeah. My villain his name is Nimrod. It's King Nimrod from the guy that built the Tower of Babel, or Babel, or however you want to pronounce it.
I bet you can pronounce it a bunch of different ways. Yeah. That's the problem.
Nimrod is pretty clear cut, but so I mean it's based in current times. So I mean it started out with going after the Catholic Church, and then it just kind of went on. I was just going to do one book and say, here, screw you, and then it turned into something else. But I don't know. We'll see how it works. But that's me.
But no, the anthology, great times, great discussions. We're glad that everyone's enjoying it.
Absolutely. And it has its own website, or actually it's not its own website, but it does have a website that ties into the Indie Fantasy Addicts group, which is indiefantasiaddicts.com.
And you can win a $10 Amazon gift card. There's a link for that too, right?
Yeah. A book funnel type giveaway, to where you can see all sorts of really cool books, sign up for some stuff, and win a $10 Amazon card.
Yep. In your announcer's voice.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to throw that in there every now and then.
Hot dogs, get your hot dog.
So today on the show, we're going to, anyway, so in wrapping this up, you got anything to say to your readers?
I do. Like I said, Divinity's Twilight Rebirth is now out. Physical edition came out September 22nd. And right now I'm running a holiday deal on my website, ChristopherRussellAuthor.com. So that's my name spelled like it is on the Zoom, Russell with 2 S's, 2 L's, all one word, all lowercase. And it is currently $8.95 plus shipping for signed copies. And that comes with the book. So this meaty 500-page epic fantasy. It comes with a bookmark. So professionally printed bookmarks with custom art on them. And then it comes with your choice of concept art posters. So here is an example of the airships from the series. So very sharp, very futuristic, awesome cut. And then you have this great effusion of Illyrium dust coming out the back. So that plays into the magtech like we discussed. And then of course you can go the opposite, and you have Pyrevants, Abominations of Magical Origin. Those are human bodies coated in coal and stone and then fused together with fire caking their limbs. Lilith, one of the protagonists, she has explosive magic. And then you have one of the minor antagonists, Ritter Marshal Ober Valeskar, who uses magnetism. And so he's a pretty cool character. Everyone said that he's pretty badass. Yeah. So those are all the concept art posters. So you get one of those with your book with a bookmark. Great
for $8.95.
Yes. This might be a one-time deal. This runs through Saturday, so 12/5.
That's insane.
I am insane.
I guess so. $8.95 for all of that? Seriously?
Yes.
Wow. Did you get a deal on books or something, or how'd you pull it off?
Between you and me, we're covering costs.
Yeah, we're not recording this, so yeah, between you and I. Wow. That's a really good deal. Kind of blew me away.
And then of course the ebook is wide. It's on all platforms. You can find that on Amazon, Kobo, different places. My social media, you can follow me and see stuff about the anthology.
You went wide? You didn't go
I'm not Kindle Unlimited. I'm wide.
How's that working out for you?
It's actually going really well, and I think that it actually benefits the what am I going to say? The larger release, bigger time frame between release model. So if you're going to do 1 to 2 books a year, getting it out there, being able to use BookBub with click-through ads that take you to your preferred method. I've seen a lot of people buying on Google Play, on Apple, on Rakuten, all these different, well, I guess Rakuten is Kobo online.
Yeah.
But all these different places that aren't Amazon. Amazon's still the biggest, but I'd say that these other people, all these other sites together, probably add up to 1.5 or 1.75 of Amazon sales.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of readers that read wide. I thought that it would be mostly Kindle. I'd say that Nook is Kindle's main competitor, but Nook sales are lower than these other sales. So people must be reading on their Android or Apple phone apps or their computer. I'd have to do some more breakdown and research.
I think from what I understand, Apple's a main competitor, you know, to Amazon. You know, like if you want to get your book for free, listed free, if it's on Apple, it's for free on Apple, it's a no-brainer. Amazon will go ahead and make it free. You know, if you just do it on Draft to Digital and throw it out to a few places or whatever, then you know, they don't really care about that. But if it ends up on Apple for free, it's guaranteed to be free on Amazon, from what I understand. You know, but so that tells me that they're a main competitor as far as Amazon is concerned. You know, they want to try and lockstep and make sure that they don't cut into their evil profits.
Apple is definitely the biggest competitor. It's the biggest out of all the non-Amazon from what I've seen.
Would you think it'd be Barnes and Noble, but Barnes and Noble seems to be dwindling.
Yes. It might be the multi-steps. It might be that the Nook is not a good competitor to the Kindle. It might also be that most people that are Barnes and Noble customers prefer physical books. I don't know.
It might be. Have you gotten into a Barnes and Noble yet?
I have. There are a number of locations in Virginia and then a few in other states. So I'm excited about those other states because I haven't reached those personally. So that means that something's going right with marketing.
Something's going right.
Yes.
That's always what you look for, is something to go right.
My favorite one so far is, and I still have to make a post about this on Imgur, is that my book did something I could never do, which is get on Broadway. So it's up there singing in a musical. Yes. Yes.
Really?
Yes. That's probably my proudest thing to date. Yes.
I'm sure that you'll have a lot of success with this. It sounds like just an awesome book. Like I said,
the main thing that I think has helped is that the cover, this is Chris McGrath. So I'd never thought that in a million years that I'd be able to get him to do it. Urban Fantasy, he did the Dresden Files.
Yep.
So never in a million years thought I could get him. Send him an email. He's a great guy, really cool, down to earth, was more than happy to work with me. And unlike publishers, I was able to communicate directly with him and discuss what we want to put on the cover. And lots of people seem to like it. So that was an amazing experience.
I had no idea you got him to do your cover.
Yes.
Oh, jeez.
That's probably been the biggest selling point to date. And I'm very happy that I did that.
Yeah, I would have never, actually, I probably would have never sent him an email, but.
I have a policy that I guess I might be almost praising, that if you don't try, you can't succeed.
And you're absolutely right.
I've even contacted Jim Butcher, Brian McClellan, all these different authors asking for them to read or hand it off to somebody in their organization to read. I've gotten one positive response back, and I think it's still sitting in their office, but that was Brandon Sanderson. So
really,
yes, a book is sitting somewhere in their office.
That's an accomplishment all by itself.
So I'm very excited. I hope that they read it at some point, but there are, if you try, I figure there's a lot of these big names that are going to be more generous than you think. Because even with Brian Sanderson, Jim Butcher, others, they said, sounds like a great premise. We wish you the best of luck. We're just too busy with our own stuff right now, which is understandable. That even happens with indies. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot more goodwill in the entire industry than anybody imagines.
And that I can believe. I've never contacted anybody that is really mainstream to, you know, even talk to them. I just never even thought about that. But, you know, yeah, you're an inspiration, sir.
Thank you. Now you have to go write that letter to Jim Butcher.
You know, no, I don't think so. I think I'll wait till I write something worth him reading. But
I think you probably already have.
I don't know. We'll see. Who knows? Maybe someday he'll write me a letter. But anyway, I no. Anyway, all righty. With that, I'm going to go ahead and call this a close. We're sitting at an hour and 15-ish minutes or so. So it's been brilliant talking to you, sir. Love the premise of your book. Love the magic system.
Thank you. Well, that's my favorite part of fantasy.
I just, I was kind of in awe in talking to you as you're explaining it. It's like, holy crap, again, that's brilliant. So, I mean, some very cool stuff there. I will be reading it probably sooner than later. But with that, I want to say thank you very much. And this is Jeff Bacon with the DIY podcast, or DIY Writer Podcast. Sorry, I screwed that up again. And yeah, I know. If you are listening to this to the end, please subscribe, follow me, or look me up on YouTube and subscribe to my channels and my podcasts. And hopefully you have yourself a great day. Bye-bye.
Please hit the subscribe button. I get a bonus for every subscriber, and I only need 1,506 more to become a full-time paid employee. Help me, please.